The U.S. Supreme Court dismissing a high-profile abortion case allowing emergency abortions in Idaho as we await landmark rulings in other cases, including former President Trump's claim of presidential immunity related to attempts to subvert the 2020 election. So here to discuss the details and implications of the High Court's decisions, UW law professor Jessica West joining us live this morning. Professor West, thank you so much for your time.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court dismissing that Idaho abortion case, reinstating a lower court ruling that paused the state's near-total abortion ban, ruling that provisions must be made for abortions that threaten the life of the mother, and obviously big implications nationwide here.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you said, this is not a decision, but an order deciding not to decide this case. And what that did is reinstate the status quo, which was a decision out of the Ninth Circuit that stops the Idaho law from preventing termination of pregnancy where there's grave harm to a pregnant person.
So when the Supreme Court overturned Roe-v-wade 2 years ago, they opened up a whole slew of options for states to allow, restrict, or ban abortions. I mean, are we going to see these types of challenges and revisions in the coming sessions, or maybe even a push to ban abortion at the federal level?
We are. We're going to see this issue going on and on and on in the states and between the states and between the states and the federal government and within the states between hospitals and medical providers and state regulators or prosecutors. The issue is really the Supreme Court in its Dobbs decision, just like you said, opened up a giant can of decisions to be decided.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, too, because the latest polling indicates 65% of Americans are in favor of legalized abortion in this country. So what impact could this decision today have on the potential for that federal abortion ban potentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, and I'm not very familiar with the political side of things. You know, I try never to guess what either Congress or the electorate is going to do. But it certainly is clear that it's creating a lot of a divide in this country and a lot of animosity as between states. People in Idaho, for example, who weren't being able to get the care that they needed to be airlifted out of Idaho and maybe into Washington or another state. It's created a lot, and I do expect it will be a political issue for years to come.
Now, approval ratings overall of the Supreme Court are at historic lows right now. They're hovering around the 40% range. They have, what, 9 or 10 opinions yet to release before the end of the session. We just learned just this hour that they are going to extend this session for at least another day. That just came down. They are definitely running behind. What do you think of the job the High Court and the supermajority, the conservative supermajority, is doing?
Yeah, well, so it is a conservative supermajority, and they don't take very many cases. So the fact that they have this many toward the end of the term, and normally a term ends in June, this one will not. It will extend into July, and there are decisions, important ones, remaining. It tends to indicate, to me at least, that there's a lot of disagreement on the court in between issues. So we still have some big decisions coming out. The Supreme Court their approval rating is incredibly low, and some of that has to do with some of the ethics issues and some of those problems that continue arising with at least some of the justices, and the incredible division and politicization of the issues. It's true, and I don't think we will see less of that as this term wraps up.
Yeah, so the biggest case, the Supreme Court will weigh in on presidential immunity. Donald Trump's claim that his attempts to subvert the 2020 election would be covered by presidential immunity. So, I mean, this is obviously impossible for you to know, but what do you think the High Court will say there? And from a constitutional law perspective, what do you think is the extent of presidential immunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is a fraught one for anyone, including a law professor, to answer right now, as the law is going to be decided within the next couple of days, right? What we do have is a case that came out of the Nixon era, and it's always been thought from a constitutional perspective that crimes committed by presidents continue to be crimes that can be prosecuted. So no one is above the law. President is not a king. Those kinds of things have generally been the constitutional framework. We will see whether that will continue with this court or whether they will grant some type of blanket immunity that in fact says something like what former President Trump's lawyers asked for, which is that regardless of whatever a president does, it cannot be a crime.
Right. And so if the Supreme Court rules this, and President Biden is in office now, and he says, you know what, I don't want to leave office, what would prevent him from doing the exact same thing and saying, I'm not going to leave office. Go ahead and take me to court.
It's a problem. It's a problem, and it creates a real constitutional crisis for the transition of power. And it's somewhat analogous to what some of the prosecutors have argued that President Trump did following the last presidential election, which was try to find ways, even potentially criminal ways, to stay in office. And you're absolutely right that a democracy needs to have structures in place so that when an elected official loses, they step aside, the next person steps in.
A fascinating conversation. UW law professor Jessica West, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. Have a good day.